So I'd like to introduce Rebecca Axline for those that do not know her. I've had the privilege of meeting her in person pre-COVID. Thank goodness that I made it to Houston before everything got crazy, and was able to visit with her and Dr. Appel and his team in Houston at our ALS clinic there. Rebecca is an amazing individual and social worker for Dr. Appel's clinic, and I have spoken to so many families who have just said wonderful things about her and how much she has helped their families during the ALS experience and beyond. So I would like to introduce her and let her tell a little bit more about herself as she begins the presentation today. And I'll kind of be her pseudo Vanna White minus a whole lot of things Vanna has that I don't, but I will be advancing the slides as she's ready for that. So Rebecca?
Great. Thank you so much, Tanya. Nice to meet all of you. I guess we call it meet. We may be physically isolated, but we're not socially isolated. We're together today. As Tanya mentioned, I've been a social worker actually about 40 years, but I've been with Dr. Appel in his clinic for the last 14, and I've learned so much about just the disease of ALS and the people and the hopefulness and the research that's going on, where back in the 30s, in Lou Gehrig's days, there was really nothing much to do, and it's so different now. And I have learned so much. What I tell people often, even though I'm a clinician, is what I often share is what all of you have taught me. And I try to pay it forward and teach little hacks and tips that other people have found have been helpful. And before I start the presentation today, which is really about how we're dealing with what we're dealing with already, and then adding COVID on top of it, is that I always say to individuals, and I'll continue to say, I would never disrespect you to say that I know what any of you are dealing with. I'm a clinician, but I'm not living with ALS. I do not have a family member living with ALS. And so I respect the fact that I do not have a clue of what you're dealing with. But again, what I try to do is make some suggestions that might be helpful. I also think it's important when I'm going through this presentation, I'll talk a little bit about mindfulness and breathing. And we know that with individuals living with ALS, breathing issues can be so different than the normal population. So please, respectfully, when I mention these things, don't assume that I expect everyone to do them the same way that they did before they were diagnosed with ALS. That it's just generally ways that we find are helpful to relax. So the next slide, Tanya. Is it moving forward?
Yes. Can you see the slide, Rebecca?
I just see the title. I was just saying next slide. There we go. Perfect. Perfect.
Okay.
So I started off with the presentation going from what's called the mental health disaster team, something that comes out with mental health in terms of all kinds of disasters. And we know that no one who sees or experiences a disaster is untouched by them. And they include hurricanes and 9/11s and other kinds of unique experiences that everyone is affected by a crisis. And it's important to understand that, because when it happens, we sometimes judge ourselves and say, why am I not coping as well as I think I should? That everyone is affected. Next slide.
I've advanced it. I think there's a delay, so.
Okay, sure. Okay. We'll just have a little bit of a commercial break in between. All right. So the Disaster Mental Health Services reminds us that during a time of crisis, stress and grief are normal reactions to an abnormal situation. We've all heard that term, but I think it's important to what that means. It means that we're really not reacting any way abnormally. We're having normal reactions, but what's going on in our world is totally abnormal. That we know that support systems are crucial to anyone's recovery, not only physically, but emotionally, mentally, and that everyone recovers at their own pace. Next slide, since I'll give you a little heads up. That we know that it's really important to remind ourselves of the way that we recover and take care of ourselves during these times. And these are kind of wellness recommendations. So we know that it's important to, it is a delay, isn't it?
Yes. Sorry about that. I did it as soon as you said. I'm not sure.
I just feel bad that everybody's having to kind of wait in the between times.
Are you seeing the wellness recommendations?
No, I still see the key concepts.
Okay, it should be on the wellness recommendations.
Okay, we did this, but the next one then. Okay, there we go. So briefly, just reminding us what those wellness recommendations are. It's important to take care of our body, to share our stress with each other, to share what we're experiencing, and also relate that it's maybe not as different as everybody else. We know that sleep and diet, go ahead, Tanya, because we'll take a little break. We know that sleep and diet are also important. There, it's moving faster. It's also important to recognize your limits, that all of us feel like we should be running at 100% or 150%. And I don't know about you, but many people, including myself, have gone through these days and just had this exhaustion we haven't had previously. And it's not always physical exhaustion. I mean, we all know what that feels like. Fatigue, certainly, if you're living with ALS, that fatigue comes just in a second. But it's an emotional kind of exhaustion about what are we going to hear next. And part of that has to do, now I don't want to just say the blanket media, but just all the information we're bombarded with one day, one thing's good, the next day, the next thing's good. We have what we call a new normal, and we think that's going to be where we stop, but new normals keep going on. It's also important to prioritize your time. And when I look at these wellness recommendations, they remind me of what we talk to individuals living with ALS, that you can go ahead and do the next slide, that we all have to manage our physical energy as well as our emotional energy. What I'd like to remind people is that there are similar things to this kind of disaster, to other ones that we've gone through, whether they include, again, 9/11, Hurricane Harvey, Ike, Katrina, anything that you've dealt with, even the time of your own diagnosis, which to me was, I can't even imagine what that is. That again, we have to remind ourselves that not only are emotional and physical issues, but financial issues as a result of all this going on, and that it affects all of us. Okay, next slide. But there are ways that this pandemic is different, and I have to call it one of those frustrating first times. It's like I have never in my whole life had a pandemic, right? I mean, even my father, who's 96, didn't live through the Spanish flu in 1917. So this is something we've never had to endure before in our lives. Secondly, I think it's important, and many people have said this, there doesn't seem to be an endpoint, where when we go through a hurricane or we go through some kind of crisis or natural disaster, or like the explosion in Beirut that just happened, there was a beginning and there was an end, and then there's a recovery period. Well, it's really kind of hard because what we're dealing with right now, we're in the middle of it, and we're kind of trying to recover and be in the middle of it at the same time. So someone said you're kind of grieving, moving forward, and you're kind of going back and forth with that. So it feels really nebulous, like there's no end point. We know that financial issues is affecting all of us, that whether we are still employed and our finances are okay, we know that they're affecting maybe our lifelong investments or other things that are available to us, maybe our other family members. I think we also have learned that it's affecting different socioeconomic groups and age groups differently. And again, back to what we hear every day about the school opening up. And I don't have school-age children at this point. I'm very thankful, but I can't imagine what that must be like to kind of try to figure out, or if I was a school teacher. I was talking to another group the other day with another neurological disease, and the gentleman's been a school teacher, and he said, they expect me to go back in the classroom, and I have this this immune disease that compromises me, and I don't even know what to do. So there's a lot of things about this emotional time that are different than other things that we've gone through before. Next slide. So my goal today is not necessarily, this is one of my favorite slides. I don't know if you're familiar with Harriet Lerner, but she's one of my favorite therapists in the world. And she said, anxiety is extremely contagious, but so is calm. And I just kind of have this to look at every once in a while when I get like frenetic and frenzied and kind of worried about things. Okay, next slide. But my goal today is not to make us feel worse by reminding us how surreal all of 2020 has been. But it's to suggest perhaps a few things that we can remind ourselves and consider building into our lives today. At the beginning of the pandemic, what I kept hearing from people is, when it's over, we'll do this. And so we were kind of living in limbo, like we were baking bread and having fun. And again, back to respectfully, those of you living with ALS, your life has been turned over ever since you learned of the diagnosis, or even before that, when you started the journey to try to find the diagnosis. So you know that unshoveled, unsteady kind of talk about what's tomorrow going to be. And I think more and more we're realizing that our moments are right now, that we are living in our moments right now. So some suggested strategies for where we are right now, and some of these I've taken from Brené Brown and some of her work on shame and vulnerability, is to consider naming it, naming what's going on right now. This is uncharted territory. I have never done this before. We have never done this before. So we shouldn't be that good at it yet. This is going on too long. Name it. What kind of emotions are you feeling? Are you feeling overwhelmed, exhausted, frustrated, angry? I was talking to a group of nurses, and they said we struggle every day, nurses and doctors, to try to save these people dealing with COVID and keep them alive. And then we leave our jobs and go out on the street and hear people who are angry because they have to wear a mask. And I can't even imagine as a healthcare professional how that feels. Or any of you going into the stores with your vulnerability and feeling like you are wearing your masks and other people don't respect your need to stay safe. And so that frustration, that anger, that feeling of just exhaustion. And we know that we can feel more than one feeling at a time. And oftentimes in grief, we call it the cycling of emotions. Like there's so many emotions going on at one over and over. It's kind of a jumbled ball of emotions, that's what they call it, because you can feel angry and sad and happy and all those at once, and you're rapid cycling almost that you don't really know what you feel. You just feel all of them at once. And to me, that's when the exhaustion and even the numbness kind of starts going. So after you name it, it's also helpful to normalize it. And what I mean by that is give yourself permission to say, you know, I'm never that great at doing anything the first time I do it. Tanya was reflecting upon Zoom, and yet we've all become better at it. Maybe we're not experts, but we're certainly better than we used to. It happens with, we learn a new instrument and we learn a new skill. We get better the more we do it. It takes us time to improve. So as we start trying to figure out this COVID and how do we live in a world that's fragile and has some safety issues, it's going to take us some time to get better at it. And we might feel like we're getting better and then it changes again. And thirdly, to set realistic expectations. And I say that big terms, be kind to yourself. Not just be kind to others, but be kind to yourself. To say out loud, I can't expect everything to flow right now. We're going to feel wobbly right now. In healthcare at Houston Methodist, we've kind of felt that way. We're trying to figure out how best to treat it, how best to triage, how best to keep employees safe, how to keep patients safe. And we've tried some things and we have to kind of wiggle around them and try them a different way. But most of all, it's giving ourselves permission to be in that learning curve and to be in that new area and avoiding what I call shame language. to say, okay, maybe I can do it better today than I did it yesterday, but not that I'm not good enough, or boy, I'm stupid because I didn't do it right at the beginning. To shaming, all that does is attack ourselves emotionally, makes us feel bad about ourselves. And that comes in terms of rest and self-care. If you say, I don't deserve rest or self-care, you're maximizing everybody else's needs and forgetting your own. And I always remind myself, when I learned CPR years ago, they said, never try doing CPR on somebody else if you don't take your own blood pressure first, your own blood rate first. Make sure you're doing okay so that you can help other people. Next slide. So as I was looking at some of these, the ways that there's been a lot of literature about how people are taking care of themselves, there was a wonderful article by the first responders, many of the EMS folks. And they developed, through the Harvard School of Public Health, some first responder micro steps. And I thought they were really helpful. And so I just wanted to put them here for all of you again to consider. Back to what I was just saying about self-care. When I care for myself, I can be my best self to care for others. If I take care of myself, whatever that means, emotionally, with my faith, with whatever my exercise is or isn't, to make sure I'm being safe and not falling, to make sure I'm doing the health recommendations that my team has offered, then I can be my best self to care for others. And those of you on the talk that are caregivers, I call it carers because you're caring for each other. I have so many people that say to me, well, I'm not living with ALS, so I don't deserve to be tired or exhausted or do anything to take care of myself. And I try to gently remind you, you are living with ALS. You love someone who's living with ALS. And so you two are journeying together. And so it's important for you to take care of yourself because your loved one depends on you. And if anything happens to you, if you get fatigued or you get COVID and you become that, you're not going to be available for them. So it's important to, again, self-care. Manage the stress. And these are little things that you can do throughout the day. I call stretch breaks when you're just kind of walking in the hallway or through your house or whatever it is, and you just take a moment and roll your shoulders back and take a stretch, or, you know, kind of just take a deep breath and breathe. And again, back to what I said at the beginning, those people who have compromised breathing with ALS, this looks differently. But as much as possible, relax your chest and take a deep breath and relax the jaw muscles or and just be in the moment. Reflective thoughts. I've seen a lot of information about gratitude, and I see people who suggest that a good thing to think about doing is every day think of 3 things that you're grateful for. And they can be grateful that I got up today and I'm still walking, grateful that I have a house over my head, a roof over my head, that I have people who love me. It can be as little as I'm thankful I have my favorite food here to eat today, or I'm going to go see the doctor next month, whatever those thoughts are, but to be reflective about those. It's important to monitor your own mental health well-being because we know we are physically and socially distancing from each other, but there's a difference between distancing and isolating. And if you find yourself shutting down emotionally, isolating yourselves even from those that you love in the house, maybe not being willing to get a chat or a card or a phone call from anyone, that you're kind of just feeling more and more sad and withdrawn and isolated, you may be withdrawing because you're just overwhelmed. There are different kinds of depression that you may or may not know. There's a real specific clinical depression that people can be diagnosed with when their world is rosy and everything's happening and they're still sad. But there's also a reactive depression, and that's real similar to grieving. When things in your life are happening that you really don't feel any control over and you're feeling overwhelmed and you're not sure what you're going to do with that. And that's really normal responses, again, to an abnormal situation. And so it's important to give yourself permission. If what you do is grieving that, oh my gosh, I'm living with this disease already and I'm trying to do the right things, and now COVID on top of it means that I can't be with my loved ones or I can't go to see my doctors. I was telling Tanya, we normally have that huge Friday ALS clinic once a month where everybody, we call it the cocktail hour without the alcohol, and everybody's visiting, and we haven't been able to have that now since February, March, yeah. And we all miss it, but we have to do what we can and be the best person we can and recognize that life is going to be different for right now and maybe forever, but we don't know what that's going to look like. Be aware of the stress in your body. I tend to keep my stress in my shoulders, other people in their stomach, their heads. We all know ourselves a little bit, but check those places. Sometimes periodically as I'm going through the day, I just kind of relax my jaw. I realize I've been tense until I do it. And then it's like, oh yeah, I was kind of tense, wasn't I? So get those mini breaks. Again, try not to judge yourself. Even if I say to myself, oh, I was just stressed again, I don't need to beat myself up. I just need to say, okay, let's try again. Let's start again. And lastly, connection. That's okay. The connection, the buffer time, maybe that's between the time that you're making one call to the time you're making another one. For people that work, it's that time in their car that they're by themselves. For you, it might be with your headphones, listening to your favorite music. Escape, there's nothing wrong with Netflix and escape every once in a while. It's also good to have a connection buddy. When I know people that work out periodically have what they call an accountability buddy that helps them make sure they're keeping on track with their exercise. You may have an accountability buddy to make sure you're taking your medication and using your AVAPS machine when you're supposed to, and doing what the doctor recommends. But it's also good to have a connection buddy to say, hey, how's it going? This might be somebody that's in your world right now, or maybe a best friend from high school. Who knows? But, you know, that's what I love about technology. I may just one day decide to text somebody I haven't talked to in 5 years and say, was just thinking about you and wondering how you're doing. I had a call this weekend from a woman in Boston. She and I went to high school and junior high together in New York, and we just decided to reconnect. And you know what? It was so wonderful. Not that it solved all the world's problems, but it was just nice to connect with somebody who was also living through today and had some connection. And as much as it's good to talk to other people, it's also good to be listeners. My mother always said, if you're always the person giving the gifts, then you rob people's pleasure of giving you the gift. So listening to others, letting them listen to you, being that mutual support to each other. Okay, next slide. So I hope you don't mind my slides with dogs. I tend to love dogs. Plus you don't have to worry about gender bias or any of those kinds of political correctness. So I just wanted to briefly remind us about the term called mindfulness. Mindfulness can be frequently used interchangeably, and people go, what does it mean? Does it mean I'm relaxing? Does it mean that I'm breathing? Am I meditating? It really just means being in the present, engaged and aware of what's going on at this very moment. So I would say mindfulness is being in the moment with all of us during this time right now, because this hour is never going to happen again, not this exact way. So this moment is something that will be a memory in the future, but right now you're in the moment and in the present. I always tell people to use the example of maybe somebody you saw in concert, maybe when you were in junior high, high school, one of your favorite bands that you saw. And remind yourself of when you were in that moment and you thought, I want to remember everything about this moment. Or maybe it was your wedding or your child's birth. You just want to inhale everything about that moment so you won't forget a point of it. And that's what mindfulness is about. It's also about slowing down enough to connect with ourselves and connect to other places. And we know it can reduce stress. And especially when you're living with a chronic illness like ALS, it's really important to do everything you can to help your body work its best. And de-stressing is a way of doing that. and kind of letting go of some of those toxic kind of thoughts and stress in your body. Next slide. I think mindfulness and exercise can be onerous if you don't practice it, because what happens, it becomes a burden, like, oh, I have to fit one more thing in my life. So I would encourage you to just keep it simple, do it regularly, and just pick a time and do it. And one of the suggestions I have is the next slide, which I think is pretty easy to do. So I'm going to ask us that we do it together. And again, if breathing is difficult for you, please do not make yourself uncomfortable. But as much as possible, just take a cleansing breath. You don't have to close your eyes. You can if you want. But what I want you to do is, as you're taking a breath, think of 5 things you can see with your eyes. You can look around the room. Maybe it's an object, maybe it's a pattern, maybe it's a color. 4 things you can hear with your ears. I can hear them mowing outside and hoping it doesn't distract you. Maybe you can hear the air conditioner on. Breathe again. 3 things you can feel. Maybe you can feel the seat underneath your tush or the clothes on yourself. Maybe you can feel, again, the air circulating in the room. 2 things you can smell. Maybe it's your perfume, maybe it's deodorant, maybe it's coffee from this morning. And 1 thing you can taste. Maybe it's your toothpaste, maybe again it's the coffee. But as you do that and continue to take your cleansing breath, it kind of just grounds you into the present. It reminds you that what you're doing right now is right where you're at. And it's a real simple way of doing mindfulness that doesn't take a lot of time. It doesn't take an app. It doesn't take specific music. You can do it anytime. And the more you practice it, that's why I call it the 5 things. It's not easy. It's not difficult to remember, because even if you get the senses out of order, like you're looking for 5 things you can taste, who cares? It's just a mechanism to kind of ground you and bring you into the present. And give you a moment to take a deep breath. Next slide. Because I think the most important thing that I try to remind myself is that stress and risk, mindfulness, sadness, joy, all of these things coexist. Wellness, disease, these things coexist. And it doesn't mean if you're doing one that the other doesn't exist. That you are living with a chronic disease called ALS, but that doesn't define you. That doesn't mean that you're not living a joyful life, making moments with the people that are special in your life and with strangers and other people that encounter your life. That being strong is about recognizing that we're all fragile and that it's okay to ask for support. I think in our culture, we were always told to pull up our bootstraps and just keep on pushing on and to be independent. And we are what we do, and we're defined that way. But I think we're recognizing as a culture that to be strong is about being brave, being courageous, and being vulnerable and asking others for support, because we really do need each other. And we're more alike than we are different. And Dr. Appel likes to talk about the Y chromosome of many of his patients who are males and having to use the 2x4 for them to ask for help. But all joking aside, I think it's difficult for all of us to ask for help. We feel like we need to be independent. But in order to be strong, in order to get through this difficult time, I think we're recognizing that we need each other and that we need to connect and be with each other. And as I said earlier, moments are what happen every moment. I don't want to wait till whatever this pandemic is kind of over to start living my life again. I don't want this to just be a vacuum. I want to be joyful in the moments that are happening right now, whatever they are. I don't know about you, but I've encountered people that even in my neighborhood, who I hadn't really met before. And people are more open to engaging and talking or or even socially distancing appropriately and laughing a little bit, to make the moment and to be the best you can, because you know what? It's going to be enough. We all are our best selves when we reach out for each other, we support each other, and we also allow others to help us as well. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. I think the next slide has some just resources that, since this is being recorded and it'll be available, you don't have to read any of this, but I think it's really good to sometimes listening to podcasts or having little articles to remind us what's going on are really helpful. And I think the stages of grief have also been helpful for me to kind of recognize that many times when you think about the stages of grief, they're about being angry and being sad and being bargaining, and we cycle through all those. That acceptance doesn't mean that we're happy about what's going on, whether it means about COVID-19 or it means about the diagnosis of ALS. It just means that we're open and honest that these things are real in our life and that we're feeling the feelings that we need to feel, and we're reaching out for support as we're going through that. So that's kind of it in the nutshell. I think that's all I have, Tanya.
Thank you, Rebecca. And as she mentioned, we are recording this presentation, so you'll be able to go back and look at the slides and kind of just remind yourself of some of the great resources and tools that Rebecca offered for all of us, and to visit again these links as well. For those that joined after we did our introduction, I am Tanya Hitchman, the Director of Community Programs for ALS Texas, and we want to invite you to attend all of the presentations that we have. We've scheduled several in August, and Rebecca kicked us off for a month of events. So do you want to say something, Rebecca?
No, I was just looking at the trilogy workshop. Who's doing that?
That, I believe, is going to be Fernando with both of these are RQS.
Yes, RQS,
Yeah.
Great. I think that will be an excellent one. Oh, great. I'm glad you're doing those.
Yeah, so we have several things planned. Of course, we always have our groups, connection groups, caregiver, patient, and our workshops for caregivers that I do monthly, Stress Less on Purpose, and we have our women's caregiver group, the Brood Awakenings, and family talks. But this month we have special events, and again, RQS will be presenting on August 21st and also on August 24th. I also want to let everybody know before we get into some questions and discussions, and we have had one comment in the chat box that I want to share with everybody on this call, but this is walk season. So we may be in the middle of one of the craziest years that probably everybody on this call has experienced, but we know that ALS hasn't stopped and we won't stop. And so we are walking from wherever you call home this year. And it's walk season. If you've not registered your teams, there's a link on here to do that. You will have a coach from our team to help you do this from wherever you call home. And there's so many fun ideas and opportunities. And I believe that Paige Rideout is on our call today too. And I was going to give her a chance to say a little bit more.
Good morning. Hey, it's good to see everybody. I know that some of you have already registered your teams, so thank you very much. We do have, it's a kickoff that is planned for August 18th and August 20th. So we'd like to invite everybody to join in then. It's going to be very similar to the way that Tanner Hawkins-Smith, who's our executive director, ran our town hall as we were kind of getting introduced to our new normal back in May. So kickoff happening August 18th. It's at, I think it's 2 p.m. Tanya, is that correct, or 30?
I am not sure. I know that if they go to this link, they'll have all the information they need, I believe.
It's at 2 p.m.
Perfect.
2 p.m.
Thanks,
okay.
Katie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so August 18th at 2 p.m. and then on August 20th, it's 7:30 p.m. And so that it would fit enough to kick off our walk season together as well. So if you have any questions, please feel free to email us or pick up the phone and give us a call. Happy to talk to anybody. And I'll make sure and throw my information in there about our upcoming walk season. So y'all go ahead and get on out there and get those teams created so that we can have another great walk season together.
Thank you, Paige. And you know, Rebecca talked about the emotions that we have right now, all of us. And our walk, the Walk to Defeat ALS, is one of the best opportunities for you to put your fear and your fight in action. You can look ALS square in the face and fight. And so this is a great opportunity for us to connect, to not be socially distanced, but to connect and unify in fighting ALS. And with that, we've got a couple of comments in our chat box. So Jack, and I'm so glad that Jack joined us today because he has been on other calls as well. He said, you guys are our only sanity check these days. We are isolating, and we have been since April, and he said actually since February and March, but now have to face getting a feeding tube placement. We are totally afraid of the hospital surgery. We are scheduling this procedure for an ambulatory clinic, hoping this is the way to minimize COVID risk by visiting this hospital. Anyone have any ideas about this? And Rebecca, I'd love to hear your thoughts first.
Yeah, I'm not a nurse, I'm not a physician, but I'm going to tell you that we've continued to have people come on an inpatient basis for their feeding tubes to Houston Methodist. There are such precautions. It's kind of like what we've heard recently about there's a lot of people that are even fearful to go to emergency rooms. And so people are waiting too long and really getting into distress because they're afraid they're going to go to the emergency room and be affected by the virus. But actually there are such strong levels of protection that the people that have come in for their feeding tubes have come in for 3 or 4 days and they're out, and I don't know of anybody who's been affected by the virus because we just have such strong, infection precautions. There are specific units where the people with COVID are kept, and they are totally away from the ones where you're going to be admitted to have your feeding tube.
Thank you, Rebecca. And Dutch commented that he just had a feeding tube put in. So Dutch, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I had my feeding tube put in 3 weeks ago tomorrow. And honestly, it was a little scary going into it, but it was a piece of cake. We tested for COVID a couple days before my admission to the hospital. Fortunately, I was negative. And like you said, the patients are put on different floors if they have COVID. Everybody had masks. The procedure went really well. I made more of it in my mind than in reality. And today it's just like part of me after 3 weeks. So I'd be willing to talk to anyone offline if they have any questions. And my wife, Diana, was there the whole time. And if a caregiver would like
No,
speak to
not the whole time.
Oh, yeah, not during.
Not the whole time, because they didn't want me to stay overnight. However, they monitor very strictly. Only one, at least the hospital we were at, and Dutch was at UT Southwestern in Dallas. They only allow one visitor in. It has to be the same visitor for the day. They screen you very well. They check temps. They put an armband on me. I never got in an elevator with anybody else. I would step aside and wait. I had my hand sanitizer in my pocket. I had hand wipes with me. There's hand sanitizer stations throughout the hospital. I'm a nurse. I was worried, but it was done very, very well.
Right. And Methodist has those same kind of precautions. I think they're very standard, especially for the large facilities. Absolutely.
Yes, and our son just added, it just so happened to occur, our son was in the hospital for 5 days, a few days after Dutch came home. So again, I was going back and forth to the hospital there. That was not UT Southwestern, but the same standards were done there. Only one visitor. They screen you, they check your temp, there's sanitizer everywhere. I was nervous being in the hospital myself for my 2 family members, but it went really, really well. We are now, Dutch is now 3 weeks out after the procedure. We have no signs of COVID in the house. I know it's asymptomatic, but we have no signs. So we're thinking it went well.
Dutch, have you gotten fat yet?
Well, I have added a couple of pounds, but
Yay.
I will say that when I went in, it was the beginning of July, and we were at a teaching hospital, and there were 20 doctors in the room because they're learning about this particular procedure and the fact that I have ALS. So I could have sold tickets, I think, to the operation. But anyway, it went really well. If anybody wants my number, I'll put it in the chat if you would like to visit.
Just one more comment about, again, the gentleman who had mentioned, Jack, I guess, is that our main concern is some of the outpatient procedures tend to have more complications. They don't work out the bugs. The people that do the procedures in where Dutch went at our facility, they're doctors, GI doctors that do a lot of this. So they know specifically how to do a feeding tube with someone with breathing issues. And that's my main concern about the outpatient procedures is when there are complications, that's when they often happen.
Rebecca, and
Hi, Alberto.
hi, excellent presentation. I have a comment, actually 2. I always have 2 comments at least. Anyway, one is, I think one of the source of stress for us, that, and also in addition, all the caregivers participate in this stress, is the time. We have that pressure for time that I guess anybody that has a terminal disease has that type of concern. Am I going to be able to do what I want to do? And this pandemic crisis put everything on hold. And I think we see the time passing, and this is, at least for me, very stressful. We have a sons that live in the Dallas area, and we haven't been able to visit them. One is actually a paramedic, and he actually works a lot with people with COVID himself. So he is a potential source of contamination that I cannot expose myself to. So it's very stressful to see the time passing. We had summer travel plans that, of course, did not happen. All these things that we don't know if we are going to be able to do later, and that is stress that I guess other people don't have. You know.
Can I suggest, Alberto,
Yeah.
before you went to the next one, can I just suggest that this is the grieving that we were talking about, but most folks, as you clearly said, have this belief that our life is going to go on forever because no one has told us that today's the only day we have. We don't have that kind of in our face that you do. And so you're grieving that you may have unfulfilled desires and wishes and things that you had planned to do. And I wish I could make that better, but it does sound like a valid grief. I would encourage you, and you probably already do with your children that you can't see, is use things like the Zoom and things like this to really connect. Even when I see my daughter in person, I can't hug her. So even if they were able to come down and visit you, that's going to be a little bit isolated. But
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
go ahead and make.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. We do what we can, right? The second thing that I think it's also stressful, and this is very much ALS related, is the because we don't have the clinics, that the physical clinics. I haven't been in the clinic since actually I had a one just before the whole thing happened, at the beginning of
I
March.
saw you, I think February,
Yeah,
March, you
it
were
was
there.
maybe the last one that was actually
Right.
in physical presence. But anyway, one of the, of course, the one of the critical things of the clinic was the breathing monitoring. You know, all the testing that you do and I have not been tested for a while. I don't know how I'm doing. Uh, I'm doing a little bit of a improvement on my breathing with the help of the trilogy. But and I feel I don't need it, but the doctor said you need to do it regardless. So the problem is that we don't have that monitoring, specifically the breathing is a concern of mine, and I don't know how we can get around it, because obviously this you can only do with a physical presence, and I don't know if any plan, if this extends for too long, and if people don't are not careful, this is going to take forever to get over. Um, we need to have a plan to kind of start retesting people, because we ALS did not stop, as somebody said here. It will not stop.
Are you in touch with your pulmonologist? Are you in
Yes,
touch with your
yes. I actually
pulmonologist?
had a because since Dr. Holland passed, I was transferred to this clinic, technically,
PCCS,
yeah,
right.
the same building, and I had actually one telemedicine visit with the doctor after the pandemic, of course, and but anyway, no testing. You know, he's based on everything he's doing is based on quite old tests, and the next time there will be the test will be probably 5 months or more old, right?
Well, this is above my pay grade, but I would explore what ability they have to test or be with RQS or whoever's providing the equipment to get feedback, or, I mean,
Yeah,
I can't imagine, I know telemedicine is getting refined more and more again, but it seems like if you wanted to be tested, you could request that.
yeah. Well, if times pass a little more, I tell you, I probably will request, because it is obviously the most critical um, aspect of this whole thing. You have to know where you are, and
We are seeing people in person on the West Pavilion, Ms. Alberto. So
uh,
you could request an appointment there if you felt safe to come in.
okay, well, that's good to know. I didn't
Yeah.
know. But anyway, I'm just sharing my concerns here, and I think it's good
Hello.
to know that there are some things happening already. Hi, Tom.
1, 2, 3.
Four, Tom. 1, 2, 3, 4. Go, Tom.
Alberto, Carol, we were in the West Clinic or West Pavilion about 4 weeks ago for testing. Took about we spent half day in testing and half day waiting for the urologists to get there because they were that busy. But it was run very well. And of course, there you're isolated into a room, and all the doctors and stuff come to you there. But that worked out very well. And they did test her for pulmonary.
Thank you, Tom. Good to know.
Thank you, Tom. I don't see any more comments or questions in the chat box. Does anybody have anything that they would like to add to our presentation? I know I want to add a tremendous thank you to Rebecca, again, for taking time out of her busy schedule. I know that that team there, as well as other clinic teams, but I know in talking to the Houston team, they have been working really long hours. So Rebecca, thank you so much for taking time out and for being such a strong link in our ALS Texas community.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, Dutch. And I don't see Steve or Tom's picture, but it's good to see everybody.
Thank you so much. Nice to meet you too.
All right, well, I don't see any more comments or questions. Oh, there's one more message. Let me see what that is.
What is
Thank you. Carrie asked, the ALS meeting this evening is a group meeting. It's the DFW Connection Group that will be meeting tonight at 7. And so you can find the link to that on our ALS Texas website, and you'll be able to see me again. And also Steve Morse will be leading that group.
Okay, yeah, we're new to this. I didn't know what the connection group is.
Yeah, it's a support group, connection group. It's for patients and caregivers. So we'd love to see y'all.